Well, good afternoon, everyone. This impromptu webinar, they're not scheduled as they were previously, but is intentional in relationship to the needs I've seen related to the budget as well as applications. So I'm going to share the agenda and then we'll go right into the forms that will be, I'm not sure if it's going to be uploaded into the grants management system. I'll probably upload them myself so that you can download them from the 2020 budget. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to look at the two forms that are necessary for the funding application for 2020. So it's the year 19 and 2020 as well. So the first one is the self-assessment tool, and the reason we use the self-assessment tool is that it provides all the accurate information about federal and state legislation for which we're accountable, as well as board rules that represent state legislation, and then the civil rights of English learners to high-quality instruction. So the strategy is the more you know, the more you have evidence for, then it puts all of us in a good space for doing the best for students. The self-assessment tool is one document that needs to be uploaded, and the second one is the application. Now, I made some tweaks based on last year, and I also made some tweaks with the self-assessment tool and gave you, it's all Adobe PDF fillable with lots of space. So using evidence to respond to each of the requirements is important, because then you'll actually have that evidence as kind of an electronic portfolio. The application changes were done because it includes LEA support for TSI schools, or if it's a charter, grade level support for charter schools. Now, the TSI schools that are identified as the lowest 5% student group for 2 years, 2 consecutive years. There's 296 schools for English learners. Of those 296, there are 20 high schools, 46 elementaries, and 129, well, actually, it's 20 high schools, 46 middle schools, and I think 129 elementary schools. Now, the reason I break this down is having that many schools in targeted support, which means that the EL student group is the lowest performing and the lowest 5% for the last 2 consecutive years, is an opportunity for us. It's a challenge to help us get clear about how we're supporting the academic success of students who are learning English, including refugees and immigrants. Okay, the second part of the webinar, we're actually going to look at the LEA response template. Now, these forms are to support monitoring visits. And remember, the purpose of the monitoring visit is for the state agency to provide the kind of feedback that helps the LEA make decisions related to aligning resources so that the impact is student outcomes. And their question to us when they did the ESSA review was, how is the state agency going to support LEAs in ensuring that every English learner has access to grade level content? Now, if you listen to the way that question is framed, it's access to grade level content. It's not the language support that you're providing them in relationship to extra supplemental support that is funded specifically by Title III, but it's the actual civil rights obligation to ensure high quality instruction related to equitable access to grade level content and success in that. The third part of the webinar is going to be LEA exemplars from monitoring classroom visits. I have one example of a charter and one of an urban district. The reason we use exemplars, as we did last year when we were helping transition from, the UCA into the grants management system, was to really identify, it's like a rubric, what does quality look like? If your application is thorough, if you're citing the kind of evidence that is reasonable and shows, a clear commitment to equity, then that's how we provide the technical assistance to help you do that. So that'll be the third part. The fourth part is a really important document. It's on our website. It's the Civil Rights of Parents of Students Learning English. And this is from the Department of Justice. Later on, probably at the end of the year, I'll do more focused on case law, which ends up really making a huge change in educational policy and outcomes for students. So that's what our agenda looks like. Now, this is the application, and there are two documents. The first one is the self-assessment tool. Now, if you look at the way I've changed it, I made sure that on the right-hand side you had enough room to list the documents submitted as evidence. You could have pages to an LE handbook that must be updated with ESSA. So if you're going to use evidence from a handbook, it can't be the old No Child Left Behind. Okay, you have to be very specific. It could be hyperlinks to an LE website. One district did a lot of that the last time. A narrative or explanation is also acceptable if documentation is available. So if you want to write your documentation of how you're doing this as an explanation or a narrative, that's fine, but make sure that you have evidence to support it and it's listed. Part of that is you want to make sure that if the federal audit happens and you're randomly selected, that you have the support documents in an electronic format in the grants management system to support what you've been doing, what you are doing, and how you've moved from what you did do. Okay, you see there's really clear. Obviously the first one is all about required Title III activities, which is about following the entrance procedures as outlined in the ESSA state plan. We're in the process of revising, not the state plan, but really a handbook for guidance. Some of the issues, and the questions are always good. I mean, that's kind of the piece of it. When a student learning English reaches a 5 as a composite score on the WIDA, then that student is reclassified as fluent. Now, the fluent students are incorporated into your indicator for EL, which is always a good thing, especially based on, that our reclassification rates are very low. The state average is 4. But the question is, you need to monitor. So the school team, student-parent conference to set up a 4-year monitoring. You really work so that the student, as the academic subjects get increasingly more challenging, that the support that's provided is important. Again, the reporting is just in the law. The percentage of ELs who are making annual progress, that's on your report card. The number and percentage of students who are who actually have attained language proficiency. The number and percentage of learners who exit and are in monitoring. The number and percentage of English learners meeting challenging academic standards. The number and percentage, and this is the sticker, of English learners who have not attained proficiency within 5 years. This is about a third of all of our students in Utah, which in itself, is a challenge and an opportunity. So this is about monitoring and how it should be monitored in relationship, whether you have electronic folders or, whatever the documentation is, but it has to be eligible and ready for anyone to come in and randomly select a student and say, oh, let's look at their folder, whether it's, electronically or if it's in a red folder or near their CUME folders. The Allowable Title III funded activities. On the website we have the spending handbook. And I just want you to understand there are two critical issues around allowable expenditures. Number one, you must expend all your funds. There are so many schools that have needs. There's no reason for the district to withhold funds, and then at the end of the fiscal year and the second fiscal year, we actually return it to the federal government. This puts Utah at a high risk. The same thing with the LEA, if they're not expending their money and asking for reimbursements, in a timely manner, hopefully every quarter. So this ends up being a challenge. The other one is supplement, not supplant. Title III funds just supplement the already state funding and other programs. So that means that you're braiding funds to support English learners with high quality instruction. And you have equitable services for English learners, private school students, teachers, and other educational personnel. You have an initial meeting with them and the documentation that allows that. And then there are only 3 districts that qualify for immigrant funding based on ESSA's significant increase formula over 2 years. It's an average based on the actual official definition of an immigrant, which is not being in school for 3 consecutive years. And ESSA is very specific about what those funds can be used for, and they're in the plan as well. Alpine is one of the districts, Granite and Canyons. So immigrants, their significant increase are in those districts. And the whole goal is that that funding allocation must be above the 10,000 minimum required for a consortium. Here are all the civil rights requirements for English learners. I put 1, not achieved, partially achieved, in progress, successful implementation with results. Now, if you're putting 4, successful implementation with results, then when the school report card comes out, it should be pretty obvious that the experience of English learners is comparable to those of native English speakers based on, whether they are in AP classes, IB classes, honors classes. So, really equitable services and success in those courses. So 5 approval criteria in the grants management system. The applicant has to meet the eligibility criteria for the award, which is always the number of ELs in relationship to the minimum, which is 10,000. That's why their smaller districts have the opportunity to be in a consortium. The application is complete and contains all the required elements. That means the assessment tool and the application. The budget had been reviewed and contains necessary level of detail. Planned costs are allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And then the proposed program scope has been reviewed and complies with programmatic requirements. That is, the completed tool with civil rights obligations and all the assigned assurances. So at the very end of the application, which I'll show you right now, is the assurances. Okay, so the reason I revised the application was, basically because we had so many schools in TSI. And again, this is an uploadable, fillable PDF, Adobe. And remember, it's the annual improvement plan based on the ESSA reporting requirements for program evaluation. So in a simple sentence, This is kind of the way to think about it. So, if student outcomes and annual progress in academic achievement as well as toward English proficiency by meeting annual growth goals, if those things aren't happening, then the intention is to align resources and evaluate the effectiveness of your programs. The purpose of this is to not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, but really engage teachers and principals and teams to use data and evaluate the effectiveness of the program based on who the learners are. So when they came in to your system, their schools, what support they were provided, what kind of language programs did they have access to, how were their families engaged. I mean, all those critical issues that, it's the right of every public school child. It's just their right to have a high-quality public education that doesn't cost them. So the first question is, explain how you're using student data and the 5 S indicators in the self-monitoring tool and your school report card. So I added that to evaluate the effectiveness of your language instruction. Now the school report cards, the audience, it's a requirement for the public so that it's easily accessible. But it's a really great source of better understanding which student groups are making the most progress toward proficiency in English language arts, mathematics, and science, as well as looking at those growth goals. So growth toward proficiency, is really an important criteria, and they're weighted the same in the accountability system. Proficiency and growth are weighted the same in elementary schools, as well as progress of the lowest 25% of your student population. So, and also the student groups, really understanding in every subject area which of your students in your student groups are struggling. And typically it's English learners, students with disabilities, and based on ethnicity, oftentimes it's Hispanic, sometimes African American. And of course, economically disadvantaged is another group. The second question, describe your evidence-based model for the curriculum materials, elementary and secondary, that are supplemental to those purchased with state and local funding. Now remember, this is supplemental. So it's supplemental instructional materials. The district has an obligation to provide the curriculum for students learning English, right? The Title III funds are supplemental funding. And the evidence-based guidelines are on the USBE Title III website. And I'm hoping to get to the point where I can do an online course to make that a little bit more understandable, or at least a webinar. And then these last two explain how you allocate resources to individual schools or an English language proficiency level in a single school, that is a charter. And the reason that's important is it's meeting annual growth goals and increased academic achievement. So you can't just spend all your funds on focusing on English language development. Yes, that's really important, but it's based on how it's connected to increased achievement at the end of level exams based on mathematics, English language arts, and science. So what you would do is you would include instructional coaches or school-based ELD support by those who are qualified. If you do not have qualified educators, explain how you will meet that civil rights and USBE requirement. Okay, so qualified educators, we changed the ALS rule to include certificates of ESL, the TESOL standards, as well as a competency-based program, including all the university endorsement courses. So this gives you a range to really, if you're interested in that, to meet with me. Charter that's done a really great job with that is Monticello Academy. They have an approved competency-based program, and Provo's working on theirs. Then list specific schools that have been identified for TSI for EL student group, turnaround, or CSI. Explain how you're going to support them with a strategic reallocation of resources. When you talk about resources, it's not just money, but it's people, materials, professional learning, funds, as well as structures, policies, and processes. So prioritize the schools and then describe the support. If a single charter, please identify the grades that need extra support and how that will be accomplished. And then the last, which is connected, it's about explain how funds are being used to supplement. Your explanation must focus on the student's learning outcome, the 5 ESSA indicators, with a statement about how you determine the effectiveness of your language program. So is it pull-out, push-in, structured immersion, dual immersion? If not effective based on student data, why and how will you address the causes of the achievement gaps? So if you have programs and you think they're effective, but the gap between the English learners and native English speakers, you know, there's a huge gap, or there's a small gap, or whatever the gap is, then how are you going to address that? The best example probably is of Davis School District, whose graduation rate for English learners is 93%. Okay, so that's an example of a concerted effort over many years to really focus on the necessary support from counselors and principals and teachers to ensure that students learning English were graduating. Here are the assurances. They're the same as last year, but if you notice, there's a very clear citation of either law or board rule or ESSA or the admin code. The biggest thing is that's pretty important is they're all important. 7, there's been legislation in the change in school fee waivers, and we have a fee waiver task force with a group who spends time really focusing on what Utah has considered a major priority, which is no student is denied the opportunity to participate in class or school-sponsored activity or supported activity because of the inability to pay a fee. Okay, so, and for any questions, the best thing to do is to get in touch with the school fee department in the internal auditing department. The other one is about meaningful communication in a language that they can understand through translated materials or a language interpreter. And then number 8, the LEA understands its legal obligation in section 1703F of the Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974 and the joint guidance of the civil rights of English learners to overcome language barriers and impede English learners from participating equally in state and LEA educational programs. So these are the 10 assurances that are connected to the application. So you have to make sure that you sign it and you date it. And the signing and the dating should be connected to the LEA name, the contact and position, and the number of the person. So those are the 2 major pieces for applying for funding. Consortiums don't have to worry about this because they've already signed an MOU. Here is, and we're going to do this really briefly. I worked with all the ALS directors to design a template so that after the monitoring visit and we send the official USBE report. This is in the grants management system, and if you can see that it's the date of the visit, the date you receive the report, explain how you disseminate it. The biggest stressor for me is when parents aren't involved. Okay, so you have to involve the parents in relationship to the recommendations or the findings. And then, what responses did you receive from the stakeholders? And then each LEA decides which recommendation they're going to respond to. So we changed it when we saw the issue of making it too burdensome to really focus on systemic changes and then quality instruction changes. And then the last part is, which recommendation for systems and then for instruction did you decide to address? What's your goal, reasoning, action, steps, and your allocations? Based on braided funding, which could be things like Title II, Title 4A, Title I, all of these federal programs, as well as the at-risk funding and TSSA. Okay, so after I read the responses, and I just want to thank everybody for responding, this is feedback that I haven't done yet, but I wanted to make sure that you knew. I talked to the ALS directors about it. But it's a pretty simple form. It's the date of, and I would be filling this out, the date of the USB visit, the date the LEA received the report, the date USBE received the response. Now, this is not about any kind of accusations about time or anything like that, so don't worry about that, because this is, remember, last year was the first year we did this. And it's based on the template. So when it says explain how you disseminated the report, the two questions are, did the dissemination of the report include parents of English learners and in languages meaningful to parents? Did the dissemination of the report include a method of ensuring specific teacher commendations were shared and their promising practices highlighted? So if, you got the report and it showed all these teachers with these really promising practices, how did you share them? Across the district, within the school? How did you honor the teachers? So, that's really the point of upscaling and disseminating practices that are based in evidence. What was the summary? Thorough, so this was a summary of the feedback from the stakeholders. Specifically, principals of TSI schools understood both the recommendations and implications of the report of change practices. So it was a summary response or feedback from stakeholders where the principals included in determining how the LEA developed their plan to address recommendations. If yes, what was their specific role? Some of the issues that we found is oftentimes there are decisions made and principals are not necessarily involved in policy decisions. Sometimes they are, but many times they aren't. And so how were the principals? Because they're the leaders of the school, instructional leaders of the school. And then this gives you some ideas about how you would braid funds. Okay, so then USB feedback on the plan. The LEA will be monitored again next year on the progress of their implementation of selected recommendations and identified actions. The classroom visits will be to TSI schools. And then I will write yes or no, and probably with an explanation. So it's a really simple format to help give people feedback on the actual responses to the visit. Okay, so the next part is exemplars. So I'm just going to give you a taste of the commendations because some of you have seen them. I'm doing this because sometimes there are districts that end up being, and charters who end up being really stressed out about the visit. The visit is designed to make observations in classrooms to identify promising practice and then to identify patterns with either the classroom observations, with what parents say in focus groups, what instructional coaches say, and what administrators say at the end, district administrators as well as principals, about, really what are their successes? What are the successes that they're feeling and what are the challenges? So it's a way to create a safe space for people to have conversations that have an impact on our students. Okay, and so here's just a couple. So this was a kindergarten. The use of small group rotations for practice and checking for skill acquisition. Teachers use questioning such as, tell me about your picture. Why is the spider your favorite? To scaffold conceptual understanding. Teachers modeled expectations for rotations before they began to support students in being independent to stay on task. Scaffolding activities included partner work, chanting to count by fives, clapping out syllables. using the use of an iPhone picture for giving children quick reference and how to draw a cheetah. So, all of these things, are really great practices for scaffolding instruction. So I'll send this out too. Here's all kinds of examples. Here's first grade, second grade. Here's a third, fifth grade team. Here's general commendations for a whole group. Here's a fourth grade teacher who used all kinds of strategies, including kinesthetic for water cycle. And she moved seamlessly from DOK1 to DOK3 using small partners, multimedia, visual STEM phrases. So, there's great, I always say to people, okay, you don't have to go to Finland to see really great instruction. We have it in Utah. Here are principal recommendations. Her commitment to engaging students in skillful questioning. You can't really move your instruction conceptually unless you know how to ask really great questions that move and support students in thinking conceptually. Mathematical principles in relationship to your understanding, and then representing them based on evidence for your answer. Here's another one. Principal was amazing. She was using student data to monitor the progress of her students. I did some problem solving, used DIBELS as the data, made a case for full-time funding. This was in a rural school. And the progress the students made were amazing because the paraprofessional working with the students in small groups and one-on-one had great relationships. She was Spanish-speaking. She had a great relationship with not only the kids because they trusted her and she was trustworthy, but also, the families. She knew the families. General district commendations about opening, this whole openness to addressing issues that are based on civil rights law. Civil rights law is not something to fear. An OCR complaint is not something to fear. You don't really want it, obviously, because you want to do the right thing for kids. But if you're open to addressing it without making excuses and just being, well, how can we work on this together, then it makes a big difference. And, there are other district people who've done amazing things, like creating an ELD lead network and really working together across district departments, which is a critical need, so that there's not siloed approaches to literacy and then the ALS directors or the people who have EL expertise are left out. This was a specific superintendent commendation, and the school board and the Granite Foundation for really providing a commitment to refugee families and communities. So these are just, examples. They partnered with the University of Utah's Urban Institute for Teachers to pay, at the secondary level, intern teachers in relationship to working with English learners. And I saw some of the best instruction ever in mathematics at Granite. Park Junior High is an avid demonstration site. So these are really clear examples of exemplary practices. Now I'm just going to show you one more, actually a couple things. So in the template for the response, this is a charter school. And what the recommendation they picked was review effectiveness of the method used to allocate resources to impact the school's increase success for English learners. So this is what they decided to do. So remember, I'm not telling them anything. We're giving them the recommendation and they're deciding. So their focus is really meeting the annual growth goal in English language proficiency and increasing the number of students exiting WIDA with a score of 5 or better. So they're very concrete, related to the data, and that's what's included in the report card. And what are they doing? Determining the reason why students are not exiting and focusing on meeting the needs of the individual students. Meet with teachers, language, and the language coordinator to create a plan for students not reaching desired outcomes. So this would be an annual thing because every year the annual growth goal changes. And then Title III allocations are used to fund the salary for the English language coordinator, along with using monies, here's an example, from Title I unrestricted funds and school land trust. So the way in which this is going to be focused is the resources are braided funding. It's not, okay, so this is Title III, we don't have that many kids, we can't do it. Okay, then here's the other question. They picked, ensure that all teachers are qualified to provide quality instruction to students at all levels of English proficiency. And of course, this is really challenging because it focuses on language acquisition, understanding differentiated instruction, understanding the WIDA key uses, designing instruction around a range of learning tasks based on the actual WIDA key uses in those four language functions and how it functions in the classroom. So give preference to hire teachers with full license in elementary education and experience in teaching ESL. Work with the current teachers to complete their ARL or APT. Include in teacher posting the need for an ESL endorsement. Now remember, these are huge systemic changes because they're changing what they've done. Give preference to teachers with an established elementary experience and license. Work toward teachers having an ESL endorsement. And then professional development funds have already been set aside for the ESL endorsement training for them. Now this is an urban district. I'm just going to give you a couple of concrete examples. So when they disseminated the report, the monitoring report, the principals gave everything to their staff. They discussed the feedback with their PTAs, their school community councils. Additionally, the report was presented at the school board with parents, general communities, school staff, the school board. Principals shared the information with a variety of stakeholders, including PTAs, SCCs, and faculty meetings. Okay, so you have a wide dissemination. Now, the thing that's really interesting about this is the principals expressed the concern about staffing and the need for endorsements. They ended up using the report as a catalyst to talk about needed changes. Some principals actually looked at other schools and commendable practices, and they went to visit there. They had their leadership teams working together. So the whole point of the report is to help you get clear about the kind of feedback from an outside entity with a common kind of moral purpose, which is every single student, including students learning English, whether refugees or immigrants or whatever their status is, that they have equitable access to every opportunity that a native English speaker does. And remember, that's their civil right. Okay, so then I'm just going to do this first one. So the first one is systemic change. So they review and evaluate the effectiveness of the counseling program throughout the district, especially at the middle and high schools, based on the standards of comprehensive guidance by providing clarity about equitable access to early college coursework for English learners. Okay, so this is a big one. We even have a new board rule that has met with quite a bit of controversy in relationship to equitable access for students who are English learners, as well as students that from all kinds of disaggregated or student groups that aren't fully represented in those courses. So create a plan to have ALS provide ongoing professional development for counselors. So it's the ALS department with expertise in language development and administrators regarding college and career readiness options for ELs. Ensure that obstacles for enrollment are removed so that EL students can access all parts of the curriculum and all school programs. After school programs as well. Work with counseling to set up regular trainings at counselor meetings for purposes of PD, awareness and strategies, eliminating barriers, providing targeted support for EL students. Include home language information and talk about access to make it more equitable for language learners, families, train counselors to teach parents how to use the language option in Skyward. And so they're not using money, but what are they doing? They're focusing on time in counselor meetings for training. So they're using a structure that's already established to ensure continuity and sustainability in relationship to reevaluating and ensuring that counselors support students' equitable access. Provide ninth grade access to computer labs at the high school with communication to ninth grade parents in their home language. Consider support at the school, communication. Provide professional development for principals, which means time for PD at the administrative meeting. And this is monthly regarding access to the curriculum, including access to early college coursework, advanced placement, and career. So this plan goes on and is just incredibly brilliant and thoughtful. It went through the superintendency, it went to the board. People in this district are incredibly committed to taking the feedback that we gave them and then really using it as a leverage point to forward the collaborative work in the district. So that's just one example. The last one, and I'll send all these documents out to you. It's from the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. So in the Department of Justice is the Civil Rights Division and the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. So it's really information for parents and guardians and for schools and school districts to communicate with them. This fact sheet is just really simple and straightforward and asks and responds to these questions. So the first one is, must a school provide language assistance if I request it, even if my child is proficient in English and I am somewhat proficient in English? Yes. Schools must respond to parents' requests for language assistance, and remember that parents can be limited English proficient even if their child is proficient in English. So this has come up several times when someone comes to register and the school makes assumptions about the child. Now, someone in a charter school said a really wonderful thing, and this is what she said. She said, well, oftentimes the parents put down that the student is proficient in English, though they're not proficient in English, because the kids have basic interpersonal communication skills, right? So to the parent, yes, they are proficient in English. Now, they're not proficient in academic English in the content area, right? So making assumptions about parents' motivations in relationship to filling out the home language survey, is inappropriate. If you had questions, you would always, for parents and their children and seeing a child struggle, you would monitor their progress and then have a meeting with the parent in a language that's meaningful to them. Okay, that's pretty much as simple as we can make it. Whatever you would do for any other student who is a native English speaker, you would do for parents, guardians of students who are learning English, who are refugees, who are immigrants. So I'm going to send this all out to you. I went over about 10 minutes. I think I made it for about an hour, but I think this gives you kind of an idea of, first of all, the way in which we're trying to systematize the way in which funding is used more effectively and strategically, how funds are braided, how the Utah Grants Management System is used as a way to ensure that you're knowledgeable about the state, federal, and board rules and civil rights obligations so that, we're not caught off balance and, when there's a federal audit or when there's other kinds of audits, then we're seen as, violating the rights of children. Okay, so that's not the Utah way at all. We believe in families, we believe in children, and so, having another language is something that we value because of the biliteracy seal and all the opportunities for economic development and translation services. So it's a great opportunity because we have so many languages in Utah. And I know that the people that I work with believe this. So I'm just trying to scaffold and support, provide the kind of technical assistance that will really help all of us as adults who are committed to our youth and children do the best for their future. Okay, so thanks so much, and if you have any questions, please call me, and I'll email this out to everyone.